from Göteborg. Per has taught Yat Technique at Göteborg University since end 70s, beginning of 80s. As always, I would love to start to contextualize a bit what we're going to talk about, the work, trying to make a... Pardon? I was told yesterday I'm too close. So I'm trying to find a balance. I will find it in the end of the festival. Yes, it will be perfect. Come on Friday. Okay, so I want to try to contextualize a bit and in a bigger perspective, just so we know where to put it in a map it a bit. So why not start with the ancient Greeks? Since the ancient Greek theater movement has been linked to the spoken word. In rhetorics, the science of speech, the right word should always be followed by the right gesture, the right movement. This is part of what the Romans later called actio in Latin. So when the first acting trainings appeared in 1700, they mainly taught two topics to their students, and that was speech and declaration. And to declare something, when I declamated, it was always with big gestures, standardized gestures, that movement often. So actually the first systematical trainings, acting trainings, was methods of physical movements and gestures. Really not Stanislavski. It's something before that as well. So gesture was kind of the language of emotions. Welcome. Among the most known creating such methods was a Frenchman called named François Delsarte. So Delsarte's acting system was extremely detailed, explaining what kind of emotions or feelings that are communicated to audience with all kind of gestures. No matter if I show you this part of the hand or this part of the hand, it means something precisely. So this was a sort of way to try to make a clear sign language for actors. But with naturalism, as you know, first in France with Theatre Libre and later with Moscow Art Theatre in Russia, this changed radically. The aesthetics turned in favor of what was seen as more realistic acting style, in opposition to theatrical. So, as you all know, Stanislavski is using the word truth or truthfulness in almost every pages in his books. So to play theater became something negative in the new way of thinking theater. So movements and gesture that had a more theatrical meaning or effect and could not be interpreted as real or belonging to the situation or the character would disappear in big parts of Western theater. And François Delsarte's system, which was very much used in the last half of the 1800s, completely disappeared within 20 years in all Western theater. And since then, it's just like disappeared from theater. But Delsarte and other innovators from 1800 that worked with gestures and movement got a renewed interest from the new modern dance field, starting in the 1900s, 19th century, 1800, mid-1800s. And one of these modern dance artists was a Hungarian Rudolf Laban, a dancer, choreographer, and dance theorist. As many of the artists working with modern dance, Rudolf Laban gathered impulses from all kinds of people and practices. And he did not have this theatrical fear in the same way of being theatrical. He was a dancer. And one important source of inspiration that Laban had was the Austrian psychoanalyst Carl Gustav Jung. Jung introduced, as you all probably know, the term archetype in Western philosophy and psychoanalysis. An archetype is an idea, is a type or an image that we all share, no matter what kind of culture we're brought up in. Archetypes are common human images, ideas, or patterns. So they are for all humans. Archetypes can take form of characters, which is probably the most known, like the mother or the king or the magicians or all the tarot cards. But it can also be shapes and qualities, like a circle or a straight line, or even emotions like fury or grief. So archetypes is something which is immediately graspable for all people. Laban started to use this idea of archetypical categories in his work. He created something called movement analysis, a method and a language to describe and communicate archetypical aspects of all movements. So the basis is that every movement can be described through 4 different categories or aspects, which is space, weight, time, and flow. And these 4, Per will probably explain us to more detail, but each of these aspects have some core values. For instance, space, movement in space can either be direct or it can be indirect. So in this way, Laban created a very specific and probably what he thought is a universal language for movement. So with Laban, we are getting very close to what is now called Yat Technique, but there is a link, and the link is Gert Malmgren. Gert Malmgren was a famous Swedish dancer around Second World War. He was working all around in Europe, and he also get to know Laban and his ideas. In the 50s, Malmgren got injured, and he had to stop dancing himself. He started to teach more and more. And for some reason, and in the beginning, many actors came to also get the movement teaching. And for some reason, they started more and more to use him as a coach. So this was the beginning of the Yat Technique. The name Yat comes from Gert, which I think was pronounced like Gert in English.
Like Gertrude.
Yes. So it's not more complicated than it's the name of the Gert Malmgren translated to Yat, and then it got its name because the English couldn't say Gert. Malmgren is a very important figure that brought back physical movement or physical approach to movements to the acting training. So with the idea of movement, that inner or outer movement is the fundament for all human expressions. I think the rest of this technique can be better explained from you, Per. But first of all, I'm curious to hear, because you yourself is not a dancer, you're an actor, and you went into the field as an actor.
Right.
So I'm curious to hear from you, what made you go in this direction? How did you get into it?
I was trained as an actor at the school in Gothenburg, in Göteborg. And I had Yat Malmgren. His name is pronounced in Swedish Yat. So that's, and then he spelled it so it sounded like Yat in English, as close as possible. So Y-A-T, Yat in English. And then when we move it to Sweden, it's Yat. But it's Yat. So, and I had in my first year as a teacher, both in what was more traditional movement training and in this character analysis, as he called it, or he actually called it that later on. So that was my first approach, and I got a language that was very precise and very usable, both in communicating with others, but also with myself to get more precise into certain qualities. And then when I finished school, I was working as an actor in Gothenburg. And after some years, I thought I should do something else. And I was also inspired by, for me, very important teacher named Doreen Cannon, a British-American teacher. And she was a student of Uta Hagen in New York. So I decided to quit my job and go to New York, and I studied for Uta Hagen for half a year. And those two influences, you could say Stanislavski through Uta Hagen's interpretation in the context of the American method, though she wouldn't call it that, she belonged to the method. So I connected those two, and after a while I went back to Sweden without an acting job, so I applied different jobs, and I got to work as a teacher, and I freelanced as an actor and director and teacher. And at that time, Yat Malmgren had stopped teaching in Sweden. It gone over periods over several years to Sweden from 1965 till 74. But he quit in Sweden, and another person took over, Francesca Veres, and I was taught by him and developed more and more this, understood more and more of this way of working with character. But I've always integrated, which Yat Malmgren also did, integrated the notion of action and activity and objective, or whatever you want to call it, goal, and character work and these qualities of movement. So it's always been important. And I find it very useful. It's almost immediately useful when I'm teaching it too, and when I'm using it. So that's, when something is useful, you keep it. If it's not useful, you throw it away, right?
Sorry, you describe it as a character work. Is it only that?
It's, no, I don't think it's not only that. It's in English you don't have the word gestalta, gestalt from German, but it is to find the qualities of when you perform, that you form whatever you want to communicate from the stage. And it could be character, but it could be any physical, verbal, inner state or states.
Could you try to just guide us through the main principles of the work?
Yeah, I should do that a little later, more concrete, but I can say a few words which is not unique for the Laban Malmgren system or method or technique or whatever you want to call it. And it is to find a connection between the physical activities and an inner state, emotional or mental or mental state, and find that connection. I mean, that's almost all training is looking for that. So a physical doing, a gesture or a movement of the language reveals an inner life, an inner state. I should describe that a little later on.
Is there any idea where we start? Kind of, as a typical way to talk about Stanislavski is early period they work with in life, later period they work with outer life, and you start from somewhere. I'm not sure if that's true, but that's many people say it's like this. Do you have an idea that it starts from there or there, or is this more a holistic idea?
You could call it holistic, I think, but I think we have to leave it starting, you have to work from the inside out, otherwise you don't get to the true expression, or the other way around, you have to work from the outside and find the inner. It's always back and forth, back and forth. That's the organic process. We're always working back and forth. You could call that holistic, or you could call it dynamic, or you can call it organic, if you want. That's how things are growing.
Is it a big difference in your language when you talk about the inner processes from the outer processes, or is
It is certain terms in this technique method system. I'm using all these words because I don't want to say that it is a method, because then it becomes with a big M and a technique. So this way of working has some of terms that are both used for the physical aspect of it and the inner aspect of it, which in the beginning is kind of confusing, but it makes sense when you worked on it, that you have weight on the outside, like you talked about, and you have weight on the inside. And of course they correlate, they work together. Then it's certain things that is only, so to say, on the inside. But I think the notion of inside and outside it's also a little confusing when you actually are in the work. But it's good as an analytical tool, I think, to talk about inner and outer.
I mentioned movement analysis as something which is from Laban, but we also have a term within the Yat Technique called movement psychology,
Right.
which also comes from a cooperation or transference between Laban
And Jung, or the ambition was that in a way. Yeah, the Laban movement analysis, LMA it's called, was actually named and structured more after Laban himself. But it is based a lot on his research on what movement is. And later on in his life, in the 1950s, when he was in England, in a place called Dartington Hall, that was a very important art center, you could almost say. People from Europe and from Russia, and Michael Chekhov was there, and Laban, and a lot of the modern dance people, Kurt and others. At that time in his life, Laban wanted to connect his movement research that he had done from the 1920s up to that point with the, at that time, modern psychological movement. And he picked up Jung, and of course he could have picked up any other aspect of psychology at that time. But it was a man that he met, and he also taught at a facility close by that using Jung therapy. So he was teaching movement there, and that's why he was connected to Jung. And he wanted to connect his movement analysis, his movement research with that psychology. So it was movement psychology. And that was his ambition to go on with that. In the beginning as a therapy, work to heal people with mental illnesses of different kinds. But this man that he worked together with, William Carpenter, died in 1954, and he was at that time an old man and also sick. And that's when he met Yat Mangren in England. And he gave these papers that William Carpenter and himself had written. He gave a bunch of papers to Yat Mangren. And being a dancer, Yat Mangren recognized his work, working on character as a dancer, as a solo dancer, modern dancer. So he immediately saw what this was. It was a language and a structure that was very helpful for the dancer, and later on he developed it for an acting training through meeting a lot of actors and theater people.
Gert Malmgren himself wasn't very. He didn't like the idea of writing a book or make it conceptualize the technique as written.
No.
Written down.
Oh.
So this is maybe one of the reasons why it's not so much transferred or out of the circles of the people that have the training.
Right.
Because there is very little literature about this. Why so? Why would it be so?
I don't know for sure. I think it was partly his personality, and partly that he was a movement person. I don't think he couldn't even, in his fantasy, understand how anyone would understand this process if it's not done in the body, in moving around. And he was afraid of that people read it and then they use the words and then they say, oh, this is this. And so his choice was not to write anything. We even had to, when I had him, it is written down that William Carpenter wrote down, and it's called The Book. It's, I don't know how many pages, a few pages, but we were not allowed to just get it printed. So he was writing it on the board, and we had to write it by hand. Partly because it also, by writing it by hand, it became into our bodies. So even then, it was through the body you understand the thinking and the structure. But now later on, it is a thesis out by a man named Vladimir Nordin that is teaching at what is now Drama Center in London. It came out, I don't know, many years ago. It's on the internet. It's called The Way of Transformation. It's very thick. He wrote so much. He didn't write anything, so he wrote a lot. But that describes quite detailed. And it's an Australian woman, I forgot her name, Hayes, last name, that looks at Yat's teaching through her eyes, because this has developed in Australia quite a bit from students of Yat moving to Australia. And it is a book coming out later this fall, by Yat Malmgren's partner in work and in life, Christopher Fattis, describing Yat's. So it's going to be 3 books out. And it's also an article in a magazine by Vladimir Nordin. So it's 4 things written about it. Wow, 4 things.
And the training exists in 2 schools in Australia, one in London and in Göteborg.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Actually, 2 schools in London, you would say. Miles Gaines Foreman's studio is there also, and Drama Center.
And actually, if you search it on Wikipedia, you also find a lot of Hollywood stars.
Yeah.
That have done that. Among them, Nicole Kidman and Anthony Hopkins and
Sean Connery, Pierce Brosnan, 2 James Bonds. Maybe that's
physical moment.
Yeah. Michael Fassbender. And you can also on the internet they speak a little about Yat.
Is it possible to
Colin Firth too.
Colin Firth.
Talking about it.
When we're mentioning famous stars.
Yeah.
Should we try? Is it possible to try to make an illustration of some of the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Can we do that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Should we move this?
You want more space?
No.
No. It's up to you. I can
One second. I'm going to start with
You want the board?
Yeah. This is space too. As you heard,
Can I have it a little bit like this?
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Laban looked at movement, and of course, it's like everyone else building another system, if you could call it building, exploring and finding out, looking at movement in all different aspects. He was the son of a military, so when he was a young boy, he was traveling in this big country called Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and he saw movement of the military, folk dance, rituals, and he also looked into movement in daily work and daily living. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's better. I prefer.
No, but we'll try to record as well.
Okay,
Otherwise
record.
we can't use the video.
I'm recorded. Yet I'm recorded. So I'm sorry. So he studied movement, and he found that you could talk about three factors when you talk about movement, and it's like you heard: weight, space, and time. I'm going to record, and I'm going to write. And when he looked into this, he divided those three factors, he called these factors, into two elements each. So the weight, or he called it the force in the beginning. All these terms were first in German, and then they were translated when he had to move because of the Nazis in Germany to England. It was translated to English. And he divided up that weight in strong and light. And maybe we could try that if you stand up. See what I should do with this. So the strong, Laban said, is with the gravity. You not only accept the gravity, we're always living with the gravity, but you also use it. So if you're standing there and move a little in place, you can't move around too much. So really feel almost like you're half a meter under the floor. And you can also use arms. So it's the strong, it's down here. And he also said it's these central muscles involved. So if it's a sound, it's whoa, wow. It sounds like that. And the opposite is when we are fighting the gravity, we're up, like hitting a balloon, poof, 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 poof. And these muscles are not involved in this. So it's these dimensions, this bodily plane. So it's up and it's down. Now we're going to go to, was this recorded? Oh yeah. Go to space. And in this context, he talked about direct and flexible. Some talk about indirect, but flexible is more precise, he thought, when we developed this, and then I agree. So it is when the movement is in a straight line from one point to another point. It's only related to one other point. So if I go like this is direct. But also if I go in a circle, it's direct. Because I'm only relating to one point. But when I turn here, so when I make a turn, so when the convex goes concave, convex, so slalom. Do you say that in English? Scheme? downhill, or this 8 that you move. You're relating to 2 or more points. So that's the flexible side. You're moving that way. And time, this is not the time of the seconds and minutes going. This is more the quality of time that music has. And in music, the closest term is staccato. This bop, 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 bop. So it's different than tempo. You can have a staccato with a low tempo, and you have a staccato with a high tempo. It's a bop, 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 or bop, bop, bop. And it's all staccato, or Laban first called it sudden, which would be the right word, but then he made the choice to call it quick, because in the old terms it was too many S's. So it was more practical to call it quick. And the opposite is what in music is called legato. That's when you are really stretching out something, when you play the violin and you let the stroke really go. So that was called sustained. And you can say that this is in the dimension of forward and back. So quick is forward, and sustained is backwards. So you have a tendency to go back. When I had Yat Malmgren in movement training, we had one exercise that we were going to step and said, forward, not back. Forward, not back. Forward, not back. Back, not forward. Back, not forward. And we did that, I think, 10 minutes every morning. It felt like an hour. But it was a way of saying, even if you go forward, you have the sustain, the back with you, or you stress that more than the quick. So all these, of course, exist together, but you can stress more or less one of them. And now Laban combined these 6 elements and got 8 basic movements. And I did it really easy for me. Oops. Fix that later. So these are the 6 basic movements, or in this context of movement psychology, what he worked on in the end, he called it working actions. And by the way, when I'm teaching, and when we are teaching this in Gothenburg, we're using the English terms. In the beginning, we tried to translate it to Swedish, everything. But we found that it became more precise using English, like the music is using Italian. It gets the more precise, and you have to understand it by doing it. So these 3 elements are the most fighting or contending elements. And that was called punching. And the very opposite of that, the most yielding quality of the movement, which is light, flexible, and sustained, was called floating. And it's these others in between. I don't know how much time we have now.
We still have 8 minutes.
8 minutes.
but it's okay.
Okay, yeah. Let's just try these two extremes. If you stand up again. So the first step when we're working on this at our school, we try to find very pedestrian, very daily things that you do that has this quality and that have to have this quality, otherwise you cannot do it. So can you think about something that you're doing and you can kind of do it where you are right now that has this quality, that has the strong, and these muscles are involved, it's a straight line, and it is more forward than backwards. What could that be? Yesterday I worked with a group and we found some doings there. Any ideas? Baking? Uh-huh. So can you come up here so everyone can see the baking, kneading the dough? Okay. Well, would you say that is strong? Is it strong? Yeah, you have, it's a heavy dough, right? It's not like something you can just, it's not like cream, you whip it. No, so it's strong. Is it quick or sustained? Sustained. Do you agree? Can you do it again? Yeah. Yeah, you see that? Yeah. And is it direct or flexible? Yeah, I would say that too. So then you are in this quality. Now can you treat the dough like you need to punch it? Yeah, right, yeah. Right, there you have it. Yeah. So next time you're baking, that's how you will do it. Yeah. So punching baking, it's called. Yeah. So that's your new field. Punch.
Yeah, it's a lot of whole grains.
Whole grains. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Come to the punching bakery. Other qualities. Thank you. So you saw both pressing and punching. Other qualities that are doings that are punching. Whole grain bread. Chopping wood, that's my favorite, yeah. It's no way you can chop wood without having these three qualities. It has to be strong if you want to split whatever you have, birch wood. And it has to be direct, you can't do it. Then you do something else. And you can't do it sustained. I mean, you can if you're really strong. Press. That's not me, though. Maybe you do that in Norway, chopping wood that way. But yeah, I agree. That's a typical. And then looking for that has to have these qualities and get the sensation in your body. It's a bodily, mentally, emotionally memory of the quality. And then we're going to go into how the language is moving. Can you find some that has this quality of floating, quite opposite? So it's light, it's not involved this, it's more back, and it's flexible. Pencil? Mm-hmm. Can you come up and so here we have the punching bakery, and now we have the painter. Let's see what kind of painter it is. Yeah. So, is it strong or light? Light, yeah. Your muscles here are not involved. No. It's kind of, it's not a thick paint. No. So is it sustained or quick? Sustained. Yeah. It's not. Or, no. So is it direct or flexible? Direct. Now, can you do it? Are you painting like a wall, or what are you painting? A huge wall. Okay. Yeah. And can you think that you wanted to make patterns? So wavy patterns. So you have to do it like this. And then you're going to put waves over the waves. And then again. And can you do it even more sustained? Because this turn there is important, because then it makes a nice pattern. Yeah. And really feel that turn there. Then it's another quality. And then it's another quality. You see the difference from that and that? Yeah, of course. Yeah, we feel. Yeah, of course. Because the body knows. Good. So we have a paint shop and we have a bakery. Punching your clothing. I'm going to ask now some of the participants in the workshop that I had. You and who was it? I don't remember the name of you who worked at the very end yesterday. Okay. Yesterday we worked with this, and they got also a text. Yeah, do you have the text with you, or do you remember your first line? Yeah. A text that seemingly are nonsense, but then we worked on it, and then it became not so much nonsense. But we were looking into how the language is moving. William Carpenter, that Rolf Lohmann worked together with, was also interested in linguistics. And he talked about that the language is dancing. The language is moving as the body is moving. So we have movement in the language. And then we worked on these two first lines in their scene. So can you do that? Do we need to have a...
Yeah.
I can hold it.
Okay.
So you feel free.
Hvis jeg får bestemme, blir det ikke noe av det.
Hvis du fikk bestemme.
Thank you. This is what we worked on. Now, could you, when you heard the first line, could you recognize the movement of that first line as it was done right now? Hmm?
When you do the pencil, that went like this, and then you have to remove it and put it up again.
Uh-huh. So it was sustained, and it was flexible,
Yeah.
and light.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Let's hear it again. And you can close your you can close your eyes, so you just hear the movement of the words, the language. Maybe we should stand. You should stand. If it's that camera, take it.
Hvis jeg fikk bestemme, blir det ikke noe av det.
So how did it move? Was it different, or was it the same? A little different, yeah. But it was clearly two energies, like it was one and then another one. Hvis jeg fikk bestemme, and then blir det,
Ikke noe av det.
and so it was two. Say it once more.
Hvis jeg fikk bestemme,
Stop. And
blir det ikke noe av det.
so is it moving? Is it strong or light? I would say it was light now too. Can you make it strong?
Yeah.
Yeah. So without, you don't have to have more volume. But
Hvis jeg fikk bestemme, blir det ikke noe av det.
okay, was it different? Can you make it even stronger?
Hvis jeg fikk bestemme, blir det ikke noe av det.
Yeah, and A was really, especially the first one, was a pressing that became a punch. Hvis I fikk bestemme. So, and can you put them together so it's only one?
Ja. Hvis jeg fikk bestemme, blir det ikke noe av det.
Can you do it even stronger?
Hvis jeg fikk bestemme, blir det ikke noe av det.
Yeah. So and this, we could work back and forth, and find the quality of the movement of the language. And then we're coming to what is it that this character called A, very sophisticated names, A and B, what she wants by saying it that way. So then we come into activities and actions that way. Let's listen to yours.
Hvis du fikk bestemme,
And how is that moving? Light. So then we are on this side. Was it quick or sustained? Quick. So then we're here, we're there, flicking or dabbing. Flicking. Let's hear it. So we are in, is it flicking or dabbing? So let's hear it once more.
hvis du fikk bestemme,
Flicking. I would say flicking too. And that's what we were working on yesterday, that it is actually a question in it. So, and a genuine question is flexible, and that's why question mark is flexible too. Of course, we can ask questions and pretend that it is genuine questions, but we really want to say something. So this is a way of working with the language, how the language is moving. And when you have radio theater, this is the movement of there you have to have movement too in radio theater. But then of course we're going to continue. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think 8 minutes are up, right? Just sit down again.
Thanks for the illustration. So when it comes to the inner work, or the way we can talk about psychology, would you then continue to use the same phrases and terms?
Yeah, and then we come to something that Lavan called inner attitudes. An attitude is, it's not like we sometimes use it in slang, both in English and I guess in other languages too. So you have an attitude, you are snotty. So it's not that, because that came into use in the 1960s. So this is really from art, and the attitude of a statue, for example, or a painting. So that is an attitude that is an outer attitude that is revealing something inner, like Auguste Rodin, the thinker. You know that, famous. So it's a revealing inner state. And now Lavan call that inner states or inner attitudes, and they correspond with this outer. So weight, space, and time is there, and he added a fourth called flow, which has to do with the emotional or feeling aspect of it. So your movement becomes in space and time with a certain force, will like or dislike. You dislike what you're dealing with, or you like it, or you produce something that will be disliked of the other or liked by the other. So it's like and dislikes. And that's where he connected Jung's terms, sensing, thinking, intuiting, and feeling, in his, or their, I should say, also William Carpenter, in their very special way. You can hardly look at Jung and use that directly in there. You have to use it in the context of movement psychology. So you cannot look at Jung directly. Just the way Laban picked it up.
We are, unfortunately, the time is up because we are going to have a break and then come back to our panel discussion. Just want to mention that it's interesting to see there are some similarities, at least in the language, from Mikhail technique, which is also influenced by Jung, partly. I just want to open up if someone has some short questions for Per. Yeah, no. Everybody needs to pee. Yeah, but there's a question here. Yes?
How do you the approach you use this system do you use it as a tool when you have some challenge in finding looking for a character? It seems very square and how to use it in an everyday life
Well, it's two sides to this, I think. One is to use it mainly with students, of course, but also professional actors, to learn to know yourself. So you can question, am I using strong more than light? Is that my preference? Is that where I go to first? And if it is that I go to strong first, I have to be aware that maybe it's better to use light, the light quality. So it's a way of learning to know yourself. And maybe that's the only method for an artist, is to learn to know yourself, especially for an actor or a stage artist. So that's one aspect of it. And yes, it seems very square, and then it's a very precise language. But if you look at the language of music, it seems very square too, until you start doing music and really playing the music. So the goal is, of course, not to pick apart and analyze and make it square. The goal is to get to the music more clearly, maybe faster, and also find variations easier. So it's two-sided. Learn to know yourself and tools. It's a risk with all methods or techniques is it's easy to come to a dead end in all, and maybe the risk is here that it ends, oh, it's too square, I leave it. So you have to integrate it into your body. Yeah, almost that. Find the sensation in you. That's the key. If you don't find the sensation of strong in you, you cannot use that term. Then it becomes square. It becomes something up here. Is that an answer?
Yes. Very logical.
It's very logical.
Ballet too is very rich in the system.
Yeah.
But still, it's getting freedom to awareness.
Right. It's interesting because the man that brought this to the school in Gothenburg was a musician, a conductor. He was the first principal, and he looking for teachers in Europe, and he found this. And then he found, oh, here is something that has the same precise language and a structure and tools as music, in terms of music and the structure of training music. And that's why it was brought to Gothenburg.
Okay, great. Someone burning with the last question? No. Okay, so we take, I have a side coach here, very nice. We take a 7 minutes break, and I'm learning from Per. Say 7 and then it gets done. So we take a 7 minutes break, and then we're all back here, and then we're going to have the panel. Thanks for